Alright, so in this video, we're just going to be setting up all the variables that we're going to be using, and we'll also bring in our Google Fonts that we will be using, which is just Railway in this case. So there's a few different things we're going to be doing. So I'm going to do a variable of color. So the way I like to name all my colors, as I've mentioned before, is starting them with CLR. So color, and then I'll call this one dark green. And that one is number 1199E. And again, this is in the files I've given you. And 1199, we need 2 there. There we go. It's not really a dark green, eh? Let's call this turquoise. Am I going to be so turquoise? That's what I'm going to call it. And then we have a color. It's like a bright green, but we can just do green now because I don't have a dark green. And this one is number 38EF7D. So you can see there are the 2 colors that we'll be using for our gradient as a background. We also have the orange color that's in our buttons. So we have an orange, color orange that we're going to need. So that one is number FF715B. And all the text is white, so I know it seems redundant, and if you don't want to, you don't have to, but I like setting up something like that, because sometimes your white is actually a little off-white, you know, a little light gray, or a light beige, or something like that, so I still like creating a variable for it. And I also want to do my font family, so I'm going to do an FF for font family, and S for sans serif, 2 S's, sans serif. Just because it's a sans serif font. I only have this one font here, so it's Railway sans serif. It's the only one I'm using, so this, you know, could be redundant and you could just do it like that. But that way, if I bring in another one, I have it. Now, sometimes you'll have 2 different serif fonts or 2 different sans serif fonts, so you might have to modify your naming convention a little bit in that sense. But I tend to, my designs that I make myself tend to always mix and match this way a little bit, so it works well for me. So there's my thing, and then I'm not going to use it for my font sizes, but I will do some font weights. So font weight, and we have 3 different font weights. There's like the I'm going to be using in the design, I use the heavy, the light, and the medium, but I just think it's going to be easier to do for naming conventions bold, which will be the really bold one. And when I say heavy, I mean the black or whatever they call it. So there we have font weight bold will be that. My font weight normal in this case will actually be 600, not 600, 500. And my font weight light will be 300. And this is where my own naming conventions, you know, this is actually black, this is actually medium, and this one is light, but this is for my design where it's a light font, a normal font, and a bold font. So this is in a way why I like using these, and when it makes it a lot easier to reuse it. You don't have to remember, was it 700 or 500, you know, it's just, that's the one I'm using as my normal font weight. So you just bring this in, you don't have to worry about the numbers so much, especially if you have like a 3, a 4, and a 5 all in the same design. So we have our colors, our font family, and that, I think, the only thing we're missing is the Google font link. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. And let's just bring that in right here. So as long as this comes in before we actually use Railway, it doesn't really matter. You could put it all the way at the top if you prefer. And again, this link is, I've given it to you, so you don't actually have to go to Google Fonts and get it. You can get that in that little text file that I gave you. And I believe that's all we need for our variables. Now, if we look at the design, we have a few different things in here that we're going to want to use. The most useful thing here that's going to be is our drop shadow that's on here, because we have a drop shadow in a whole bunch of different places. So we're going to have a mix-in for our drop shadow. Let's make a mix-in also for setting up our fonts. You're going to see it's a lot easier than having to write different things each time for your color and your weight and everything. Because we are changing those in a few different spots. We're going to make one for our buttons because we have 2 different buttons. So one thing I'm actually going to do is just to make my life easier. Let's come up here and say variables to just sort of show where my variables are. And actually I'm going to copy that and paste. So we got my variables there. Then we're going to come down a little bit further. And we're going to have our mixins. And now we can write a few mixins, and this section here will be our actual styles will be over there, all the way down at the bottom. So for the mixins that I'm going to want for this one, so here in our mixins, let's do our at mixin, and let's just call it font. And we can do here, we can set up a bunch of stuff for it already, right? So we're going to have our font size. We're going to have it give a font weight. We can have font size, font weight. We can also do a line height. And is there anything else in here? Color would be useful. I'm actually going to do color, font size, font weight, color, and line height, and font family. Now, I think these are all useful things to have, but I think the line height and the font family and maybe even color are useful to have defaults. The only thing is, if this was used site-wide, your default probably wouldn't be white. You'd probably have a different color as your default, so I'm going to leave it blank like that. The line height, I'm going to give it a default one, and we're going to have to modify it on at least one, but let's just give this a default here of like 1.5-ish that I might change after. And my font family, I also want that to have a default of font family sans serif, which we're not actually going to change, and we don't really need this. I could set that font family in my body and not have to worry about it anywhere. But again, if you were using multiple different fonts, this could be worth having as sort of a default that's just built into your thing. If you're worried about sort of oversized SAS files because you're repeating font families all the time, yeah, you don't really need it in here. Or, you know, once things are gzipped and stuff, which we'll be looking at another time, that would sort of take care of the file size on that. So now we just have to set it up. So we have to say the font size is font size. The font weight would be the font weight. The color would use color. The line, I'm so used to putting the $sign out. Line height would be line height. And the font family would be font family. And save. And we're not using it anywhere yet, but that is good to go. Next one, what should we do next? Let's do one for, so now let's create one for the box shadow that we're going to have to do. So I'm going to do at mixin box shadow. And for this, I'm not going to put them in the order that you'd normally find them in for box shadows, because there's no real benefit to that, because like here I'm putting the ones that I'm going to be changing every time, and then we're putting defaults at the end, and the default ones have to be at the end. If you try putting a default one first, it gives us an error. So in general with my box shadows, they always have certain properties that are the same and a couple of ones that I modify. So the ones that I usually modify are the color and the blur. And other than that, I usually have similar things. So we're going to do color, blur, and those are going to be locked in. And then we're going to do our horizontal offset, which will be 0. Our vertical offset, which will be 0. And our spread, which will be 0. And these are values that I tend to always keep when it's centered underneath. And in general, if you do have an offset on your shadow, it's going to be the same offset every time. So this can just help speed things up for you. So every time you do your box shadow, you only have to write 2 things in instead of having to write 4 or 5 things each time. So now we just do box shadow, and then it just has to be in the right order. So horizontal offset, vertical offset, blur, spread, color. And there we go. So we just have to remember it's color first and blur second. And if you'd prefer it the other way around, go for it. Use it the other way around. And the last one we're going to make is for our buttons. So at mixin button. And now our button, it needs to have certain things all the time. So at include button, what do we need? We need to have, we're going to do some extra stuff on this. So I'm not going to put the variables in right away. Let's just sort of think about styling a button. It's always going to be a display of inline block. It's going to, what else? It's going to have padding. The padding and margins I'm going to put up here. Well, not margins, but padding will be up here. So it will have padding. So padding will link to the padding that we're going to give it. So here, let's say padding is a default. Let's give it a default of like 1 of, should we give it a default? No, we're just going to say padding. And is there anything else? Oh, the background color, obviously, and the text color. So I'm just trying to think the order that I'd want to do it in. Let's say color, comma, BG color. So then we'd have our color is color and our background is BG color. Let's just do BG. Be easier to remember. That's usually how I read it. And let's save that. So it's always going to be inline block. It's going to get some padding on it. It's going to get a background color. We have a few other things it's always going to have. Text declaration of none, for example. I think that's about it. And my padding, I should have a default on this, I think. I'm going to give it a default of like 0.5 em for the top and bottom and 1.25 for the left and right. And should we put in, okay, I'm going to leave it like that for now. And I think those are the only mix-ins we're really going to need for this one. I have a gradient, but I'm not going to bother with a gradient mix-in. We only have the one. And just one thing I realized, I made a mistake here because I mentioned that these have to come at the end. So if you are giving it a, if we're making it an optional argument, so we're giving it some default values, making this an optional one to enter, it has to come at the end. It can't come over before the other stuff, or you will get an error along the way. All right, so all of our mixins are in place. Now let's go and start taking a look at setting up the typography so then we can start really focusing on the layout a little bit after that. So one thing I mentioned is because of the naming convention that I used here with card, card price, card description, card title, it's always card _. So one thing that is nice about the way SAS works is if I nest everything inside the card, we can just use the ampersand and then title. And I'm going to show you how this is exporting. So here on my title, we want to set up our font. So now we can use our @include font and set it up. So we need the font size, the font weight, the color, the line height, and the font family. So the first thing we're going to want to do is our font size. So the font size in this case is 69 pixels. The font weight, if we remember, was font weight bold. The color should just be white. We have our color white. The line height, I think, is going to be 1. And the font family we don't have to worry about. So I should be able to save this. Let's refresh here. And there we go. We can see that it has worked. So I'm going to come and open up my CSS file that has been pumped out here. And you can see, even though I'm putting ampersand, it's not nesting it inside. It's not doing like something weird. It's not giving me a card space card title or something like that, which would work, but it would be super redundant. But because we're not using spaces anywhere or anything like that, I'm not going to save that file. This will just export its own thing. It's super nice, clean CSS. And one of the reasons I sort of like the BEM naming convention, just because, it makes it easy. SAS makes it even easier to use than some other stuff. So let's just make that a bit bigger so you can see it a bit nicer. And this doesn't have to be so big for now because we're just setting up the typography. So that is good. I just realized I also need a text transform on here that I didn't include, but we'll just add it in text trans. Oops, I forgot my semicolon. Text transform uppercase. And we'll refresh. There we go. And see my line height, we can even make smaller, maybe 0.9. 0.7. too small, 0.8. And there we go. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to do my and price. So for my and price, this is again at include font. And the size of this time is 60 pixels. The font weight is font weight light. The color is white. And I think we can just end it right there because we don't have to worry about line height. I believe should be fine because it's just one line. And I'm going to come after this. And while I'm still inside my price, let's write span and put on here that the span has a font size of 30 pixels. And hit refresh. So that gives us the nice smaller size right on there. We're gonna have to play with the margins a little bit too, but I'm come back into these to play with the margins probably. Yeah, we'll come back in. No, let's do it right now. Let's just come up here. I think it'd make life a lot easier. Global selector. Let's just do a margin of 0, a padding of 0 on everything, just to make life a little bit easier. And is that my image? That's. I'm gonna have to resave my image. I didn't realize that I got one that had all that empty space after. The version you'll get will not have that issue, but I'm gonna finish this video first before I resave that image. So that's good. My price is good. Now, I do have a thing on brackets installed, which is on brackets. I'm not using brackets. I'm using VS Code. I have a thing installed on VS Code where you can see that it color coordinates these things. So that is really handy just on making it easier to see what's where, because obviously when you start getting nesting on, sometimes it's a bit confusing. So I can see that price is purple, so this is the price closing. Span is light blue, it's there, and the card, which is yellow, is the why it's this one yellow all the way down here. If you'd like that, so just in case you're wondering what that's all about. Now my price is done. Let's go on to my next one. So after price, ampersand, and this will be description. So my description, once again, at include font. And this time it is a font size of 24 pixels. The font weight is normal. And once again, color. Oh no, the color is different this time. The color, in this case, I'm going to do an RGBA. And we're going to use the color, or we're just going to use black, straight up black. And at like 0.7 or so. And let's save that and hit refresh. And so this is just, I like doing this so then when the background color changes, the color of the font actually sort of changes with it. So it's a darker version of whatever the background is. So using a black that is transparent is a nice way to make sure that you get the colors work better together than using a pure black by doing it like that. So that looks pretty good. The line height looks fine to me. And of course, there's our buttons to do still, but the buttons will style all of that together in one video. All right, so it's time to do our buttons. So if you remember back to our mix-in buttons, we have to set a color, a background color, and if we want, we can modify the padding. If I need to modify the padding though, I think I'll be coming up to this one for it. So all the way down here, they're not part of my card, so I'm gonna come after my card and do a dot button. And so my dot button, this is going to be, we're gonna do it first, I guess, at include button. That makes sense, right? So the color of it is color white. The background of it is color orange. And let's just save that and hit refresh and see what we have. And before I go to hit refresh, I don't think I did button, I think I did BTN. So let's save that and refresh over here, and voila, we have my two buttons. So another thing on here, we'd want to set up their font and all of that. So we can do an at include font. So on my button here, the size of it was 18 pixels. The font weight on these, I believe, was the normal. normal. And the color of them is white. So we're gonna have to do that color white. Save that, hit refresh. There we go. Our buttons are looking a little bit better already. So that doesn't look too bad. We're going to want to put a border radius on these. And for the border radius, let's just say it's like 5 pixels. And check that out. Oh, a bit more, 15. Good, good, good. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Let's just make this a little smaller. And I'm going to stick with 10. And yeah, I think that looks all right. The only thing is I just realized I don't actually want the background to be orange on these. So I'm going to write transparent as the default color. Good. And now we need to do my second button. So my second button, we're going to do an @ hyphen hyphen, so not underscores if you remember, and I called it accent. And this one we can change the background to color orange. So there we go. Now the advantage of both of them having the padding is the text still lines up properly on those. And now the last thing we need to do is we want to add a hover effect to the two of them. So I think for the for this one, the main hover effect was just giving it a the drop shadow on it. So I'm going to come onto here and hover, and you can see where how nesting and all of this is really coming into play. So, and hover, and we want to use a box at include box shadow. I did not know if I pushed return there that it would autofill all the spaces I need. I just don't remember what they all are. So I'm going to have to scroll back up and take a look really quickly. And I don't think I need all of them. I just need a color and a blur, and the rest of it should be set up for me already. So the color of it in this case is just going to be black, and the blur on it, let's try 10 pixels. And I'll just delete the rest of that. Hit save. And this isn't... And it's not working, so let's just go up and look here to check, because I'm not getting an error, so everything is compiling. And here I comma separated things that didn't need to be comma separated. Save. Those are just supposed to be spaced out. So let's save that again, refresh, and there we go. So my black is too dark, so I'm going to change this to RGBA black and do like a 0.5, 0.25 even maybe, and refresh, and there we go, much more subtle. Maybe I'll do 3.5. Now if I want that box shadow to transition, I'm going to come back up onto here, and I'm going to include the same thing actually, color. But I'm just going to take this and make this color 0. So it has a box shadow that's transparent. And then, so here, actually I might as well look at the error that I got. So when I saved that and refreshed it, I was getting an error. So it's saying after this, it was expecting a close thing, and instead, like the closing bracket, and instead it got the and hover. And I'm pretty sure it's because I forgot to put my semicolon there. So now we have a box shadow that's invisible here, and then we have our box shadow there, which means we can transition the box shadow. Ease out 300 milliseconds. Refresh, and slowly comes in and out. That's really subtle. Let's make it a little more. Maybe we'll go back to the 0.5. It's still subtle, but I'm going to stick with that for now. We'll stay with that and see if we modify it once more of the layout is done. It's hard to completely see it. I might also change the size of the box shadow. So there we go. I think that's looking pretty good for our buttons, and now it's actually just time to do the rest of the layout and make it look really nice. So for the rest of the layout, let's start by coming back up to our card and changing this and giving it a nice linear gradient. And we can do, I think it's going to be 45 degrees. We want it to be our color green to our color turquoise. And not 45 degrees. Would it be negative then? I always mix up my degrees on these things. Yeah, so negative 45 was what I wanted. That's looking good. Now, obviously, it needs quite a bit more padding. So let's start with that. Padding of, this is going to get changed in a minute, and you'll see why. But let's just start with, like, I don't know, 3M. Just to give it a nice spacing all the way around. So that looks okay. And we'll come in and give it a border radius of, I don't know, 25 pixels. And I'll move that over. So I'm pretty happy with that. It also needs a box shadow. So let's do it at include box shadow. It's going to be RGBA. We'll do black at 0.5 again. Because I think that will be enough. And the blur can be pretty big. We'll go with 25 as well on the blur. And I've gotten, and I think that looks pretty nice. I'm happy with how that is looking. And you see now that we have padding on that, that already looks a lot better. We notice that a lot more when we hover on top. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to go back to the design just for 1 second. It is all right aligned. Okay. So now the reason I need to change this is I want my card image. So I'm going to come down here and do and image. And just to make sure, I'm pretty sure I wrote image like that. This I'm actually going to do is position absolute, which means up here on my card, I want to do a position of relative because I want to make sure that the absolute positioning of my shirt is in there. So position absolute. And let's just hit save and refresh and see what happens. So everything else is ignoring it. So we're going to move it over now. So we're going to say left is negative. I'm just taking a random guess. So that's not terrible. Let's just go look at the original design. This is more or less lined up with the top of my text. So that means the top should be about 0. There we go. So that's looking better. Now it is completely out of the flow of everything else, so that could be a bit of a problem depending. But overall, I think that looks okay. Now I mentioned I was going to be changing my padding, and it's because of this. I don't want my text going underneath my t-shirt, obviously. So what I'm going to do is on my card over here, I am going to I want to change my padding from 3 on all the sides. So it's going to be 3, 3, 3, and then really big. So sadly, that means all 3 of these will be 3. And then on the left, I'm going to have to make it, and I could be choosing pixel values to try and figure it out. So that's looking better. Now, one problem I'm running into is the size of it, and I didn't do it at the beginning, and I should have. Here where I have my star, let's add in a box sizing of border box, because I don't want this thing becoming gigantor. There we go. That looks better. So the padding on this side still needs to be a bit bigger. Let's just make this like 650. Let's see what happens. And then this padding needs to be, there we go. The top 0 is not working out anymore though, just because of how we move stuff around. So the top, let's just add, my padding top is 3M. Let's do top 3M. And see, that should, there we go. I think that is more or less where I want it to be. So that's looking really, really awesome actually. And because we styled all of the typography, the rest of the layout, it needs some tweaking, but it's more or less come together. And it's one thing that I see people doing all the time where they focus on the layout, then the type, and then sometimes you have to readjust the layout. So it's weird sometimes setting up all the things first and then doing the layout, but I find you get much better results. When it clicks, it just, whoa, look, there it is. And you're finicking around a little bit less because your fonts, they're not changing now. I'm not changing the content. I'm just tweaking layout purposes now. So a little tip there. So let's just space these out a little bit more and we're done. So here I just need on my price. Or one thing you could do that I like to do is try to only put things on margin bottom everywhere, because then you know where the space is coming from. If I put a margin top and a margin bottom on this, then I put a margin top, let's say, on my buttons, then sometimes I don't really know where the margins are. Is it a margin top on this, or is it a margin bottom on this other thing that's creating that space? I'm going to be putting margin bottom only on everything, so I know the spaces are always coming from a margin bottom, especially because I've gone and reset my margins here. So I know that all of my margins are coming from a margin bottom. So let's start at the very top. We'll give this a margin bottom. I like working with M's, so I'm going to do 0.5 M because it's going to be about half the size of the font. So to me, I think that will be about the space that I want it to have. Maybe it could be a little bit smaller than that. And on my text, so my price here, this will get a margin bottom of roughly, it's going to be a bit bigger. If I do 0.3, let's do like a 0.5 M here, just because I'm after roughly equal spacing. That looks pretty nice. And then I need just a little bit of space after these. So that's on my description. We can come on here and add a margin bottom of like 1M, because again, this is relative to the font size, so the margin will be about the size of that font size. There we go. A really nice looking card in CSS and HTML using Sass, and a nice little way of practicing all the things we have learned. So there we go. Lists and Sass are important for the more advanced stuff that we're going to start playing with. If you're coming from another programming language, you're probably familiar with their concept. They're a lot like arrays. If you have no idea what an array is, though, don't worry about it. It's not hard to understand. Actually, you've already started using lists. You just didn't realize it. So a really basic list is, here, let's just say color ABC. I have a list with one item in it. Yes, that's just a variable, but yeah, it's also a list with one item in it. You can even have lists that have no items in it. List with nothing. That's a list with no items in it, and we'll get to the whole parenthesis thing pretty soon. In the previous video, we also saw a list with multiple items in it. So we had our shadow 1, which had 1 pixel, 2 pixels, 5 pixels, 0 pixels, red. So that's a list with 5 items in it. We can actually get the length of a list. So again, if you know about arrays, you probably can think of something like this. And just because I want some CSS to compile, so we can see the results of this, I'm going to put this in my body tag here. And I'm going to say that the margin top of this is the length of list with nothing. So the length here is just a function, right? So we have length, and then we're putting something in there that we want. So we already looked at some other functions, and this is just a really basic function right there, which is just going to grab the length of a list and print it out as a number. So just to show you, let's do width, length, and color. So that should come out as 1. And last but not least, my height will be length and shadow 1. And there we go, we have a height of 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's counting how many items are in there. Now, something that's important about lists is they can contain a whole bunch of different types of values, from strings, values, booleans. Booleans are true and false, and we're going to get to those a little bit later. And there's another function, we're going to see it a little bit more much later on, but here instead of length, I can write type of, and it's going to tell me what it is. So it's a list. Here, type of, and we're going to see color. Because there's only one item in there, it knows that's a color. So it's saying that's a color. And here, just do type of, and we'll see what we get. We'll get list again, because there's a whole bunch of stuff. But just here I have a list that has a color in it. We could also have this be a number. So say I do 50 pixels, and it's going to tell me it's a number in there. We can also have strings. So strings is when it's just words. So say I said, hello there. My list now has a string in it. And this is coming up as a list just because here I have numbers and colors both in the same list. And you can mix and match and pretty much have anything you want in a list. We can also access things that are in a list, and it's not very often that we're going to do it this way because we want to automate things a little bit more. But one thing we can do is, let's just say the background on here is, it's another function. It's called nth, and we're going to do, let's just actually change this up a little bit. We'll change my color to colors, and let's put in red, blue, green. So I'm going to do nth and then colors, and then I can put the number 2. And so what it's going to do is it's finding blue. It's finding the second thing in my colors here. Now, if you haven't doubled in any other programming languages, this probably makes a lot of sense. It's finding the second thing in my list. If you have any background at all from any other computer programming language, whether it's JavaScript or something else, this might seem really strange because in other languages, an array starts at 0. They're not arrays, they're lists, and in Sass, lists start at 1. Now, Sass lists can also be really, really strange. Pretty much, as we saw, this is a list, something with one thing in is a list. Pretty much anything can be a list, and the rules for defining them are loose at best. In other languages, there are varying degrees of strictness for defining arrays, and especially compared to Sass, where pretty much anything goes. So I'm going to make a few different color things here. Let's just do one where it's ABC, DEF, FED, and then let's make another one, colors 2. We'll do ABC. I'm going to comma separate them though this time. DEF, FED, and whoops, that shouldn't have been like that. We want a color. And last but not least, let's do colors 3. And you know what, let's put a 1 on here just for consistency's sake. And in here, I'm going to do it like this. Oops, ABC, DEF, FED. And you know what? All 3 of those are identical. I know that sounds really weird, but let's do what we had set up before. So I'm going to do a width, length, colors 1, and that's going to come out to 3. And you know what? Let's just copy this and paste to speed it up. And we're going to do this one as colors 2 and this one as colors 3. And you can see that the number 3 is coming up on all of them. They're written completely differently, but for all of them, it's coming out to the same thing. And even if I wanted to, I could comma separate these, that are in parentheses, and I'd also get the same result. So even though, however you do it there, it will have the same result. Now the parentheses here are actually creating sublists or nested lists, a little bit of listception, if you will. But there's only one item inside of each one of these. Let's not worry about it too much. We're going to look more about that in a second. But it's just to say that there's lots of different ways of creating and writing lists. If it's simple lists, I tend to write them out like this because I just find that's by far the easiest way to look at it with the comma separating. It makes it really clear what's going on. So that's for simple lists how I'm going to do it. But in the next video, we're going to be looking at expanding this out a little bit with our nested lists, and it gets a little bit more weird in that one, but we can still keep it nice and organized. Interpolation, such a strange word. So I got the Oxford English Dictionary definition here. The insertion of something of a different nature into something else. And more or less, that's what Sass interpolation is all about. To start off with, we're going to look at a really basic example, and you might not really see the point of it right away. A little bit like lists. Once we start using some control directives later on, though, you really are going to see the point. We're going to be using these all the time. Now, the reason we need to worry about interpolation is, let's say I have an example, red here, and I have a component, and the background of my component is example. Now that is all fine and dandy. I have a background of red on it. But sometimes what we want to do is we actually want to use our variable's name as part of the component's name. What I mean by that is it would be nice if I could have something like this and then have it say example. So if I'm bringing in a whole bunch of different variables, I can sort of set this up. We're going to see some cool stuff after. And I want that to print out component red. But I get an error because example, it's not something that can be printed here. It's only going to work as a value of something. Well, that's where interpolation comes in. We need to insert something of a different nature, a variable value, into something else, in this case, into a class name. That basically means it'd take my variable and actually print out its value. With this, we can turn that into a class name or even a property if we want to. So to do interpolation, what we need to do is we start off with a hashtag and then some curly braces. And then inside of that, we would write in our variable name. So here I'm going to delete this and put that there. So it's hashtag, open curly brace, close curly brace. And inside the two curly braces, I'm going to put in my name of my variable. So now it's printing out that variable's value into my CSS. Now, one thing that's actually kind of cool is let's switch this over to 5, and maybe we change this over to width just so it makes a little bit more sense. Component 5 doesn't make a terrible amount of sense, but what we can actually do in here is we can actually do math in with our interpolation. So what I can do here is on my component where I'm doing the interpolation, what I'm going to do is let's just go and do +5, and it's going to give me component 10. Now, why would you even do that? That's a good question. So let's find out the real reason why we might want to do something like this in the next series of videos. So just as a quick reminder about how mixins work, let's make a really quick button mixin once again. So we're going to do @mixin, and we'll call it button. And I'm going to give this 2 different arguments. We're going to say color and background. So my background color will be my BG, and my color will be my color. And then we can just give it some other things that we want all of it to always have. So inline block, no variables to worry about here. Border radius, 5 pixels, padding, 0.5em, 1.25em, let's say, something like that. And then if I wanted to use this somewhere, I might have a button, and I can just do an @include button and then give it 2 colors, black, yellow, and there we go. I have a button that has a yellow background color and black text color. Fantastic. So first we declare our mixin, and if needed we put in our arguments. So I put in my color and my background. We declare the values that we want. Now we can also throw in a bit of a twist to our regular mixin here by adding in some optional arguments. So if you remember the optional argument, I'm going to put a comma and then put in, let's say a border. I'm going to put border color, and my border color, we're going to go with something a little bit more fun here. Let's try doing an adjust hue, and we'll take my background color or color. We'll take my background color, BG. So we're going to take the background color and we're going to move it over 50 degrees. So that just gives us an extra argument, but it is an optional argument. So by default, this will kick in every time. So if I come in here now and we want to do border, is say 1 pixel solid border color. And now I have my border color showing up there. So it's just an adjustment of the hue. It might look a little weird doing an adjust hue like that, but it just, something a little fun that we could just throw in there. And because it's an optional one, what that also means is if I come in, let's just make this one a button 1, and then I can come and do a button 2, and I can include this one. And let's say it's white text, a dark gray background, and in this case I think it's going to look weird. The adjust hue is not even going to work on that really, so I'm just going to put a black on there instead, and now this one will get a black background. So I'm overwriting my optional argument up here with black. So if I don't put anything, this will be used, but if I put something, it will take whatever value I actually put there. So that's all good and dandy, but what happens in this case if I had a mixin that, depending on the circumstances, the number of arguments might change? So I can have my optional argument that I can leave there or not there, but it's always going to use that optional argument. But let's say we have something for a box shadow. So I'm going to actually delete all this. So what we're going to do, let's just bring in the one that we already created for the t-shirt card that we created. So here is exactly what we had. But, you know, so anyway, if we wanted to use that, I have my box 1. I can do my @include box shadow. And on there, I want my red, say 10 pixels, 0, 10 pixels. Oops, forgot my comma, 10 pixels, 10 pixels. And there we go. I have my my thing coming in. But what if I wanted 2 box shadows on this? So I can't take this and then include it a second time and change this. So maybe I want you know, black now. I can't do that because this isn't going to create 2 box shadows. It's just going to make this one overwrite that one. To create 2 box shadows on something, you need to have them all together, just comma separated. But if I come in here and I try adding more stuff, say blue, now I have, you can see I have this error popping up saying that I'm passing 6 arguments, but box shadow only accepts 5 arguments. And that's a problem. Also, if you didn't know you can have multiple box shadows, just check out, I put a link in the description for this video that shows a pen where I played around with it. The pen is using text shadows instead of box shadows, but the principle is exactly the same. So what we want to do is we can change things up a little bit with my mix in here. And I'm going to take this, and I'm actually going to delete it all. I'm just going to write shadows, ... And at the beginning of that, I should have an exclamation mark. And let's just get rid of this here. And let's also get rid of all of this here. So we're pretty much going back to scratch. So what I'm saying is shadows ... The 3 dots here indicate that we can now have a variable amount of arguments. So now I can actually write in as many values as I want in here, and I'm never going to get an error. So to get this to work, I just have to come up here and write shadows. And then I have one here saved on my clipboard. I'm going to paste it in, and we're going to see that it brings in both of them. So here I have my first shadow coming on in my box, and then a second shadow being applied to it at the same time. Now this works and it's awesome, but you might notice one other thing, and I won't get an error here pretty much ever. If I write things in a random order, it'll pump out the CSS even though it'll create an invalid value for my shadow. So if I came in here and I wrote red, blue, green, it gives me red, blue, green, and my box shadow won't work. Now the CSS just won't, the shadow won't work. The CSS is fine. It won't break my file. It just means the shadow won't work and I'd have to come back in here and fix it. But it just does mean that you have to put in the right amount of things. So if you sort of screw up a little bit, it won't save you on this case like we used to get the errors. You have to write in the right amount of things. And we'll see some solutions coming up in future videos. But in the next one, we're going to look at a simple solution just to make sure you're organizing your things properly. So if you're writing good Sass, you should be using variables. You don't want to have to write out box shadow every time and put in all of these numbers every single time. You also probably want to be using them consistently through your site. So one thing we want to do here is create a few variables and then use them when I include my box shadow. So over here, let's come up to the top. We'll say shadow 1, and I'll copy that and paste it here. And now what I'm going to do is take this one over here, and we'll make a nice little shadow 2. And then of course we don't need to have them here anymore. Shadow 1, shadow 2, and I can get the exact same results but much faster this way. So these would just be stored up at the top somewhere of my one of my styles, and I can use them anywhere I want. So I'd have a lot of boxes with box shadows on them. I can stay consistent with my shadows. I can apply multiple shadows because I'm using this the variable arguments here, so I can put in as many shadows as I want, and I know they're properly written in just because I'm storing them in my variables. I'm writing them out properly here. I don't have to worry about making a typo later on and accidentally putting one too many or not enough things, and it should be fine, and it's always going to print something out. So that's one way to stay organized when you're using variable arguments like this. When we created our shadow mixin, we used a variable argument to let our mixin accept as many arguments as we wanted to feed it. And that can be really useful like we saw. We can also have our add include accept a variable argument though, and this can be super useful as well. So for example, say we do something like this, where I have my at mixin example, and I do arg1 and arg2, so it's taking a couple of arguments, and then my color is arg1, and my background is arg2. Now, when I come in here and I do my component, and I'm including it, so I go at include mixin example. So I'm including my example. I could literally have vars with 3 dots here as well. But how do we actually populate this? Like, what's the point in using the 3 dots? Well, there's a reason that we were already looking at lists before. So I might have something like this, where vars is a couple different things. It's my AAA, BBB. So I have a list there. So here I'm not entering the different ones. They're just going in order. So it's taking whatever's in vars and it's inserting it in there. So my color gets set to AAA because that's the first argument, and then my background gets set to BBB because that's the second argument. But you know, you're never actually gonna use this. Let's look at a realistic example. So here's the button we used as a refresher when we were first looking at mixins. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, if we're writing good Sass, you're making a lot of variables. So you've got colors, hopefully you have them. And colors tend to get a lot of variables. So here I have a whole bunch of variables all ready to go. So I have all those variables. I have my button here. So we have this, we could do something like this, right? So I could come in here and technically I could say that my button primary at include button color black color primary, and that should give me my primary button. Then I could do the same thing for my secondary button, secondary color black. Let's say we keep that, but this changes to secondary, and then one more button just for the fun of it, add include button accent has my secondary color here, and over here we do my accent. So I get all 3 buttons, but this does require a little bit of work. When we do something like this, we're gonna have, normally these would all be stored up in one place, and then they're living off somewhere, and then this is all off somewhere else. And what if I wanted to change the color of my buttons? Well, you're digging around a little bit, you're looking for everything. It's much easier when you're storing all of your colors in one place. So what I might do, and let's just move this actually down here. What I might do is have all of this set up, and then I could come in, I'm going to hide this away just so we have a bit more room. And then I would do something like this of button primary, and I might as well just copy and paste here to make life a little bit faster for you guys. So I do something like that. Then my button secondary, btn secondary. Hopefully you're seeing maybe where I'm going with this. And then last but not least, my button accent. And then here, when I do my include, all I have to do is include btn primary ... This isn't going to work if I just do button primary like this. You can even see it's missing an argument of bg. Because if I'm just writing button primary, it's going to take this whole thing and try putting it in as my color. By putting the ... it means, oh, I can look at the different things that are in that list now and actually use them as my different arguments. So here, take that whole thing out here. Secondary, and then take this whole thing out here, accent, and it gives me the same result, and it pretty much involves the same amount of effort in setting up. The advantage is it's much more organized now because all of my colors for everything will be living in one place. And if ever I need to make a change, it's much faster and easier to do. And just in case you're a little bit confused, what we're doing here is for each color, for each button, we're creating a variable. First, we're putting the color, and then the second, we're putting our background for each one. So when I do my add include, when we use the ... to set a variable for our argument, it means it's going to take as many arguments as we want to pass it. It's going to take all the values of btn primary here, and it's just going to put them bang, bang. It's going to insert them as we're going. One thing that's kind of interesting with this is if I include a new thing up here, let's just say I did like 15 pixels, nothing bad happens. It just ignores this property. So that can be useful. Depending, it might, if you were counting on it being used and then it didn't get used because your mixin wasn't well set up, that could be a bit of an issue. But at least it won't break things along the way, which could be annoying. Where you can run into an issue with this, though, is if you don't have enough, then you're going to get something because I don't have an argument for my BG. I only have my color black. So as you'd expect, I do get an error for that. But if you add, I could have 100 things in here and I would never get an error. It just ignores the ones that there's too many of. So for this challenge, I provided you with a bit of starting HTML, nothing too fancy here, a little bit of Sass, and not very much, just a few things here, and just really some pretty basic CSS actually, nothing too much. And what I want you to do is create a mix-in for transitions. This one should be relatively simple. And what I want your mix-in for transitions to be able to do is look at this box right here. So that box right there, you can see it's not currently transitioning. And what I want you to be able to do is include transition. And in that transition, I want you to be able to write the different things you want. So for what I've asked in this one is that we put in a few different things, right? So I want the right to transition by 500 milliseconds. And I want the background to transition over 1000 milliseconds. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to hit refresh. And hey, look at that. It's transitioning like I hoped it would. And if that's working, so right now I have those, I should be able to add in more arguments. So I'm going to add in ease out on this one. And we'll come on my background here. And I wish that didn't show up as brown. It's really annoying, but that's what it is. And we'll do an ease in on this. I should find out why that is and fix the colors. But anyway, I'll hit refresh. And so you can see that the background is still transitioning even when this is done. And it's sort of highlighted even more because I've added in the timing functions there. Now I won't lie, this isn't exactly the most realistic use of a mix-in, but if you can figure out how to do it, and it's fairly simple, it just will make sure that you are understanding how this works. And once you've done that, it's time to move on to the second part of this challenge, which we'll be looking at in the next video. So if you have that first one working and now you're moving on to part two, we're using the same files for this. The first thing you're going to need to do for this one is create 3 lists. Your first list should contain only 2 colors. The second one should contain 4 colors, and your third list should contain 6 colors. Now you have to create a mix-in. So the mix-in should output a gradient. You should be able to give your gradient as many arguments as you want, and it should always work. So we're going to use this to apply it to our different sections. If you look in here, you have a challenge part 1, challenge part 2, and a challenge part 3. So each one of these, we're just going to give a different background color, or gradient, I should say. So challenge part 1, I should be able to do an @include gradient list 1. And that's obviously the list name that you gave it, so I'm going to save that. And you should get this. It won't be the same colors as mine, but you should get a gradient coming in to there. Now I can come in and do my next one. So challenge part 2, and I can do an @include gradient list 2. And when I save this one, so I'll save, I'll come and refresh, I get another gradient. So this time it's being made up of 4 different colors. And my challenge part 3 @include gradient, and I want to do my list 3. and refresh, and now I have a gradient made up of 6 different colors. So that's cool, it's working. Now, once you got that working, or maybe you can do it right from the start, it's up to you. I want you to make your mix-in work where it can also accept another option of the degrees. So 45 degrees, refresh, and now the 45 degrees has changed there. If I come on this one, 200 degrees, save, and I can see the degrees now it's going this way. So I can use the degrees if I want. So it's an optional argument. It's not something that I have to include, but if I want to, I can include it, and it will change how it's working. And if I don't include it, my mix-in will still work. And of course, if you have trouble with this challenge, please head on over to the Slack channel and let me know. At content is awesome. Basically, it lets you pass your styles inside of the styles indicated in your mix-in. That was confusing. I just confused myself there. Let's see a simple example. So let's say for some reason you have a site where you need lots of boxes. Why? Who knows? But we need them. So we have the following markup, just what we see here. We have box, 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 primary, secondary, and accent. So we could create a mix-in like we've already seen. So I'm going to come into my styles here, and let's do a mix-in box. It needs a background color, and it's going to have a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels, and a background, which would be my BG right there. So then we come down and we do our box primary, and we give this a at include box, and let's say red. And we save that, and I hit refresh, and look, my red box comes in. So we can, repeat that now for my secondary, and make this one blue, and now my blue box should come in. Awesome. And we can keep going like that. But we could also write this using at content. You'll see that the output is actually a lot cleaner. So if we look at the output that we're getting right now, actually, we have my box primary with 100, height 100, background red, box secondary 100, 100, background blue. So first, just to show you something else that we could do here with our setup. So we're going to make a small change to this here. And what I'm going to do is actually take all of this out, and we'll get rid of all this for the moment. So my mix-in box, and I'm going to put dot box inside of here. So you might remember that you can include selectors inside of mix-ins. And this is obviously very important for how this is going to work. So on this, I'm going to do a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. And then what we can do is just do an at include box. And one last thing, I'm just going to take off my argument for the moment because I'm not using it, and we'll get an error if not. So let's refresh, and they disappear. So it doesn't really, we're not doing much. But if we go and look at my styles now, I'm getting box is width 100 pixels, height 100 pixels, because I'm including my box, and that just is outputting this. So this is the content that I'm getting. Now this doesn't make a lot of sense right now. I can add include box and it gives me what I need, but really that seems, it's just odd and pointless right now, right? We could have just written this out. Normally we didn't really need Sass for this. But this is where it gets more interesting. So up here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more line. So I'm going to do an at content. I can save that and actually refresh here, and there's no changes whatsoever at the moment. But where it gets interesting is when I use my include, I can open up some curly braces and add whatever I want in there. So when I do add include box, I could actually add include box, and then I could do background is red, and I'll save that. And now all three of them have become red because all of them are getting a width of 100, height of 100, and a background of red. So without the content, we can't add to our box, but this lets us, when we're including it, add stuff to it that we want to, but it still seems a bit useless, right? But with the power of nesting and our parent selector, all of a sudden this gains a lot of power. So watch this. Add include box, and then we can do an at primary background green. And then I can do my ampersand secondary background blue. And then I can do my ampersand accent background yellow. Save that, refresh, and oh my goodness, look at that. Isn't that kind of neat? And if we go and look at my styles, that also comes out really good here, because what it's doing is it's doing box is 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and then it's just putting the color on all three of those ones. Because if we look over here, I have my box, and then I have my box primary, my box secondary, my box accent. So this is setting the sizes, and then this here is setting the color on them. So that's really, really nice and handy. Okay, so you probably aren't creating a lot of colored boxes on your site, but I bet you are using media queries. Media query mixins are the best because, well, media queries are long to write and can be a pain in the ass to modify when they're scattered throughout your code. So I'm going to come up to here and just come in and do a add mixin, and we're going to do media query small for media, well, MQ media query. It's going to be an at media only screen and min width. We'll go with 650 pixels on this one, and inside of that we'll do my at content. And now I can come down here and we can do an at include MQ small, and in there I'm going to do my body as a background of red. Save that, refresh. So if I go bigger, it should stay like that, but if I go smaller at one point, click, it should go back over. So when I hit 650 pixels or smaller, it will be green, but when we get bigger than 650 pixels, it goes over to red. Awesome, but it gets better than this, because if you remember, you can include media queries inside of selectors. So I could actually just take pretty much all of this without whoops. I could take this and put it inside my body here. And we can save that and hit refresh on over here, and it should be exactly the same thing. So inside of there, I can use my add include for my media query inside my body, and it will be doing the exact same thing. My body's green, and then my media query is there, and my media query inside my media query is giving the body of red. But with Sass, we can do it this way, which is really, really cool. So that means I can come and build out a whole system here of media queries. So we're just going to build a couple. So mix in media query medium, add media only screen, and min width. Let's go with like a 960 pixels. Add content. And then at mix in media query large, at media only screen, and min width 1200 pixels. How fast can I type this? At content. There we go. And then now I could come down and set these all up. So just to make my life a little bit easier, I could do background red like that. At include media query medium, background of yellow, at include media query large, background of light blue. Save all that, hit refresh, and let's see what we get. Green, we should get red, yellow, and then light blue. Boom, look at that, it's working. Now obviously you're not going to be using your media queries to be changing background colors, but just being able to write add include and something as simple as that, instead of having to write out a full media query every time, yes please. And just in case you need to add some custom sizes, you can do that too. So let's see how we can do that in the next video. So I mentioned it can get a little bit better, and this is where you could actually have it include an argument as well. So say you came into here and you said at mixin media query custom, and this would be great for when you have that thing that just, it's like this finicky component that just isn't working the way you want it to work. So what you can do is just media query custom and have a size in here, and then we have our whole at media. So at media only screen and min width size at content. So now I can create my own media query breakpoint. I wouldn't use this a lot, but it's one of those things that could be super useful just to like pull in at the right time for that one component where the font needs to be readjusted. You know, the font size is too big, and it doesn't really work with your other breakpoints at all. You know, it's not even really close, or just something that gets in the way. So this could be useful at times. So then I can do an include media query custom. And now I do need to give it an argument. So I would say, let's say, we'll go a little bit bigger. Let's do it like 1400 pixels. Background will be fuchsia. So save that, refresh over here. So we should get to light blue, and then shortly after the light blue, it should turn to fuchsia. And there we go. So we can do it with a custom size as well as the regular size like that. So we can do it with custom sizes, which I think is pretty cool. Even though I barely ever use something like that, it's nice to have that as an option and easily be able to set it all up like that. If you know some JavaScript, you're probably familiar with for loops. They work the same way in Sass, and we can do some really awesome stuff with them. If you have no idea what a for loop is, though, that's fine. You'll get an idea of them pretty quickly. Now, to create a for loop, what we're going to do is do an @for. We're going to do a variable called I from 1 to 10. And we're just going to do that for the moment. So let's explore this a little bit and see what we're doing. So basically what this means is we're going to take this variable I and we're going to set it to the number 1. And then we're going to run any code we have in here. Then once the code's run, it's going to take this number and it's going to switch it over to 2, and it's going to do it again, and then 3, and it's going to do the code again, all the way until it gets to 10, and then it will not run when it gets to 10. It's going to 10, so it'll run up to 9 and then stop. So let's get some code in here and see what it's actually doing. So .call, and let's just give this a width of 1 to see some CSS that's outputted from this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break my CSS off to the side here so we can see both of them at the same time. So we can see that I've written this and I have call 9 times there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's run this code 9 times. But obviously this is a little bit useless. Now, in case you're not really getting what's happening here, the variable again is being set to the number 1, and it's outputting this. Then this is going to get switched to the number 2, and it's outputting this one. It's getting switched to the number 3, then it's outputting it this time, and so on and so forth, all the way until it gets to 10. When it gets to 10, it stops, so it doesn't run the 10th time. It stops at number 9. And bear with me, this is going to get a lot better really fast. So instead of having the width set to 1, I could take this and I could set the width to the variable I. Let's save that. And now it's doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can see it's actually changing the width each time. But once again, this is a little bit useless because this one is going to overwrite this one, and this one's overwriting this one, and so forth. So this is the only code that's really doing anything doing anything at all. The other ones are kind of useless at the moment. But that's okay. Let's see in the next video how we can use a little bit of interpolation and make this a little bit, or not a little bit, much more worthwhile. So what I want to do is say each column has a different class, say column 1, column 2, etc. Now I can't write column I like this, if you remember, because the variable has to be a value that's coming out, and this isn't a value, this is part of a property. So if I save that, I'm going to get an error. It's saying an unexpected selector was coming in there, so that's causing a problem. It's not going to work. But if you remember to interpolation, we can do this. We just have to wrap our variable inside of curly braces. And in front of those curly braces, we just have to put the pound sign. I'll save that again. And now we have column 1, column 2, column 3. And each one has a width that's equal to the number, because we have the number here and the number over here. So this is cool. We can use it to spit out different classes, and the I is changing the width as we go on. And we can make this even further and more useful by adding a little bit of math to it, and we'll see that in the next video. So our widths need a little bit of work still, but at least our classes aren't overwriting themselves anymore. And now we can take that and make something really awesome by fixing the width a little bit here. So instead of the width just being set to I, what we can do is we can change this and set this up a little better. So what I'm going to say is that the width is actually 100% divided by 10 times I. So think about this for a second, what it's doing. I'm saying I have 100% divided by 10. So that means I have 10% times I. So the first time this runs, it's going to do times 1. So it's going to give me 10%. The second time it runs, it's going to give me 20%. Because this is always giving me 10 times I. So 10, 20, 30, 40. And because this has the percent symbol in it, it's going to keep that. So let's save that. And we should see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60%. It just keeps going. And that obviously looks a little bit more useful. We have an honest to goodness column system being developed out of this, but there's still some improvements that could be made. So let's use some extra variables in here to make this even better. I'm going to come down here, I'm going to do column number, and let's go with the 12 because 12 is a very common one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say from I and 1 to column number. So right away, I'm going to save that and it's going to change and it's going up to 11. Now this is a problem because I don't want it to stop at 11. I actually want it to go all the way to 12 because I have 12 columns. Well, one way we can fix that is instead of saying 2, because 2 means it stops right before there, is I can actually change this to say through. So through means include this number and then stop instead of stopping right before it. So from 1 through 12, and now you can see when I save that, it added in that column 12 right here. So that's good, but I'm getting up to 120%. I don't want to actually divide by 10. In this case, I want to be dividing by 12. So I can take that column number and put it here too. So let's save that. And now look at that, a column system just like that. And it works perfectly. And the nice thing with this is because we're using a variable, if I wanted to change it somewhere, say I go, oh, on this website, I only need a 4-column grid. I only have to change that one thing right here and it just updates the whole thing automatically for me. Oh, this time I need a 6-column grid. I'm working on some crazy website with a 24-column grid. Whatever it is that you need, you can have. So really nice and cool. And we can adjust things on the spot and it does it pretty much automatically. Really, really nice. We can just use 9 lines of CSS and even less than that, actually 7 lines of CSS, and we're getting all of this out of it. So I think that's pretty awesome. It's challenge time. I want you to write your own app for loop. You're going to start by creating a variable called color primary, just like this, and assign it this exact value. Now, create a for loop that will create 5 shades of this color, each one saved as a class. The first one should be the original. So we can see here I have color primary 1, and it's the original color that I have right here, 2A1, 2A1, B5B. Then my loop is getting each step as 10% lighter than the previous one. And just as a little hint, don't forget about the lighten function that we saw. Whoops, not like that, like this. We saw that lighten function a little while back, so that will be kind of useful here. As you can see, the classes should be named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll need to do some creative thinking to get this into work. It is kind of tricky. Now, there are some hints. There's 3 hints for you that are available, but try to do it without the hints. They're there for when you're really stuck and frustrated. And you might get really stuck and frustrated with this one at the beginning, and that's okay. Don't forget there's also the Slack channel, and if you do want those hints, you'll have to go and download the PDF that comes with this challenge, because that's where they are. Good luck on this one. Don't get too frustrated with it. It take a little bit of thinking and some work, and the challenges from now on will probably be more in this vein, that they're not going to be super easy. They're going to involve some thinking. Do it step by step. Get the for loop working and sort of work your way through it and see how well you can do it, and try your really best at this without looking at those hints, but they're there for a reason, because I know that it can be frustrating sometimes to get some of these things working, and we've only sort of looked at a cursory glance at the for loop, but it really is using some of the things we've done with interpolation and some other stuff in the past already. The each directive is another way we can write a lot less code. It's a little bit like the for loops we were just looking at, but rather than looping through a set of numbers, it loops through a set of things that we give it. Now it can take a little while to get used to, but it can be a lot more useful than the for directive. The basic structure of an each loop is, well, at each, like that. We're going to put in a variable in, we're going to say 1, 2, 3. And then we can use our interpolation like we've been doing a lot. Variable. And then say background is red. So let's save that, and you'll see I get a 1, 2, 3, and all of them get a background of red. So instead of looping from like 1 to 10, what it's doing is it's saying it's going to look at each variable inside of these. So it's going to say it's going to take my number 1, my number 2, and my number 3. And it's going to do whatever is in here for each one. So you can see that it's done it once. I have 1, so I put my variable 1, and then it put background red. Then number 2, background red. Number 3, background red. If I add a hamburger here, it will add that as a class because I'm using interpolation right there. And then it will come in and set that one to a background of red as well. So instead of having this set up with just a background of red on here and random numbers and a hamburger here, what if we switch this over to color? And the variable name here is literally anything you want it to be. So I'm just putting color in red, blue, and green. And in general, what you're going to do when you're using each loops is you're just going to come up with a word that makes sense. So for each color in red, blue, and green, so each one of these colors here, I'm going to take that color as a class name, and I'm going to use that color here. Color. Save that. And so you can see my class of red gives a background of red, my class of blue gives a background of blue, and my class of green gives a background of green. And already this is becoming a lot more useful. Let's take a look at another example. So here I've set up this, which is very similar to the last one we were looking at. So for each link in normal link, important link, and external link, take that name, make it my class by using interpolation, and give them all a text decoration of none. So I have normal link, text decoration none, important link, and external link. And pretty much exactly what we had before, but just in a different circumstance. What if at the same time we wanted to set the color of the links though? I mean, there are easier ways to set all their text decorations to none than this. So, why would we be bothering? Well, we can use nested lists or lists inside of lists like we looked at a while ago. So for each link in here, so let's add in, I'm going to make a nested list for each one of these. So I'm just going to wrap them in parentheses to start with. And this last one here. And my normal link, we're going to add the color of purple. Purple. We've got to spell things right. This one will make red. And this last one over here, let's make that one green. So I'm going to save that and let's just see what happens. And that's not quite what we wanted, right? So it's taking each complete list here and it's just outputting it, and that's not at all what we want. So what can we do about that? To pull this off, we have to tell it to look through the items in each list by introducing a new variable for it to loop through. So instead of just looking for each link, because it doesn't know this is my link name, it's just saying, okay, I have one variable and I have 3 items in my list, so it's just going to take the whole list. As soon as I add a second thing in here, so I'm going to say link and color, now it's going to look at each one of these and it's going to look for different parts inside of it. So I'm going to save this, and it's gone back to normal. So it's looking for my link, and then the second thing, my color, is my color. The only problem is I'm not using that. So let's come in here and add color, and save that. And there we go. I have my normal link is purple, my important link is red, and my external link is green. So pretty much what's happening is the link property is looping through the first set in there. So it's getting the normal link, my important link, and my external link. Is looping through the second part of each one of these nested lists. So it's getting the purple, the red, and the green out of that. And we can also make it easier to read, because right now we have the side scrolling on, which is really awkward. So what I would suggest doing, if you have things like this with these multiple nested listed lists, is just to tab them over. And put each one on its own line, because that just makes it much easier to see. And then if I do want to add new stuff, I can come in and add new things. So I have purple, and let's say I want normal, bold, and normal. So what I can do is for each one of those, then I also have my font weight, which will be weight. And we also have to come in here and add that weight. There we go. So the link will loop through these, the color will loop through those, and the weight will loop through those. So we'll hit save. And there we go. So you can start seeing how this can actually speed things up for you. Now, hopefully you watched that last video and you said, wouldn't those lists work better as variables? And by gosh, that would be a great idea. So let's go ahead and do that and also refactor the code a little bit here just to make a little bit more sense. So what we could do here is I could have my normal link be normal, purple, normal. I could have my important link be important, red, bold. And we could have my external link be external, green, normal. And by doing that, we can also, because I'm using external, important, and normal here, we keep doing all the work the long way. So what we're gonna do is here I can just add link, so it automatically just take this one and then add link to the end. And then here, what we could write, instead of writing all of this out, so let's delete all that, I could come in and write in normal link important link and external link, and save that, and it should actually give me the exact same output. So we can see it is, and just to make sure it's actually working, let's just change this one to yellow so we can see that it is. I'll save that. You can see that has just switched over to yellow. So this is working exactly the same way that it was working before. This is really, really handy. But you know what? It's not perfect yet. We can take this one step further if we wanted to. Instead of writing it out like this, what we could do is just put links. And then let's delete all of you and delete all of you. And I'm just going to wrap all of this in parentheses. And, whoops. And we'll put a comma at the end there. You get some parentheses and a comma. And this gets parentheses. And you can actually keep that there at the end. So if you remember back, this is just making nested lists inside of my links here. So I have 3 lists, and each one of those lists contains another list. And what I could do here, instead of saying in each one of those, I could just say inside of links. Now, what's the advantage of doing that? Let's put this back to green. Whoops. Green. And hit save. So we should see that switched over back to green. So this is compiling properly. And the advantage to doing this way instead of what we just had before is if you had a new list, if you had a new link that you wanted to add, you could just come here and say new link, light blue, light, hit save, and that whole thing just gets generated. You don't have to go back into your each loop and add the new thing here too. You're not doing the work twice. You're only doing the work in one places, and this is where these nested lists really, really start to shine and come in handy. Once again, if you have a JS background, you probably know what an if statement is. But if you don't, it pretty much means if this is true, do this, and if it isn't true, do something else. To use an if statement, it's pretty simple. We're going to use the @if, so it's the if directive here, and then you put some parentheses, and then you put in your curly braces. So it's if whatever is inside of this is true, do what is inside the curly braces. Just so we'd be able to get some CSS output on the side here, I'm just going to wrap all of this inside of my body here. So we can say if something is true, we can, so I'm just going to write the word true in here, and we can actually just write true like that and it will work. So background of red, and I'll hit save, and so because it's true, my background is red. If I switch this over to false and I save, my background gets nothing, because if false is true, which it isn't, obviously, background becomes red. And this would be the same as if 10 is equal to 10, background is red, and if 10 is equal to 11, well, obviously it's not, so we get nothing there. So we can use a whole bunch of different operators in here. So here I put the double equal sign, which pretty much means equal. I can also do something like that, which means not equal to. So if 10 is not equal to 11, which it isn't, so that's true, and it's giving me red. I can do a greater than, so 10, or in this case 10 is smaller than 11, so that's true. Or I could do greater than, and 10 is not greater than, so it outputs nothing. You can also say something like this. So is it greater than or equal to? So if I do 10 to 10, that's going to equal true because it's equal to. So it's saying if it's, if this is bigger than or equal to, or the same thing, I can do the less than. So is 10 less than or equal to 10? And it outputs, and it works. So these are some of the options you have, and it gets a little bit more than this. And again, if you're coming from a JavaScript or other programming language, you'd probably have a better idea of all the different options you do have. Now, another thing we can actually do is check for two different things. So let's just bring this up to 20. So this is going to output nothing. So 20 is not less than or equal to 10. But I can actually come here and write or. And this is different. If you're used to JavaScript, you'd be doing something like that. But we can literally just write in the word or. 1 is equal to 1. Hit save, and now it's working. Because this isn't true, but this one is. So in this situation, you only need one of the two of them to be true. So because this one is false. So, okay, this is not false. Let's go look at this one. Oh, this one's true. So I'm going to print out this code. The other option, and let's just make this and you'll see it's not true. And if you're coming from JavaScript, you probably know it like that, but we can really just come in here and write and. If this is the case, both of them have to be true. So let's just make this 5. So 5 is less than 10, and 1 is equal to 1, so it outputs something. If one of these is not true, then nothing comes out. Or is only looking for one of the two of them to be true, and they both have to be true. Now, this might seem weird, and you're going, well, why would I actually ever use this? We'll start looking at how we can actually do that in the coming videos. I hope you remember this. This is the each loop that we created in the last little section of videos. And let's say we wanted to change this up a little bit. Let's say I want most of my links to have an underline after all. My design has some links that are white though, and obviously they'll be a bit hard to read, so they should have a black background on them, and I don't want those ones to have an underline. So I'm going to call this one highlight, and it's going to be a white link, and it's going to be bold. So the text is white like I just mentioned. So I'm going to come here and take off my text decoration, because I want most of them to have a text decoration on them. But what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to say @if. And when you're doing your if statements, I strongly recommend just write out the syntax properly to begin with. That way you won't forget anything. You won't forget to close a parentheses or close one of these curly braces and then come back inside. So we can say that if my color is equal to white, we want something special to happen. So in that case, we want the background to be black, and we want the text decoration to be none. So let's save that and see what happens. And look at that. Only my highlight link gets the background of black and the text decoration of none, and none of the other ones do. And we can make this a little bit better because, in general, maybe this would work, but what if I decide to change the color of white here? Well, then it's not going to work. These colors can always be changed. Different things can happen. I'll probably always be keeping the same name for my link though. So what we could do is say that if link name is equal to highlight, and we'd get the same result. So that might be just a safer way to do it, but maybe you have multiple ones that have white backgrounds, and that might not be white. It might be your BG body BG color or something like that. But whatever it is, just think of, there are all different approaches you could take to getting this to work, but it's a nice way to do it to get things to be a little bit different. So you can be using if statements in other things as well. And I think that's important to understand. Sometimes when we use an if function, we want something to happen when it's false. We can use the else directive to do just that. So if we go back to that really simple example we were looking at the very beginning, if 1 is equal to 10, my background is red. Now nothing is printing here because 1 is not equal to 10. What if, in this situation, we wanted something to happen? We just want something different to happen. So what I can do is, if 1 is equal to 10, it becomes red, and I can say else background blue, and save that. And so my background is becoming blue because they're not equal. And if I were to make this 10 is equal to 10, that's true. So now my background has switched over to red. Else statements are super useful, and most of the time if you're using if, you're also going to be putting in an else in there somewhere. Not all the time, but a lot of the time you will be. So let's put this to actual use. So here's a little bit of a setup I have. Now one thing just to note is I've done a success, a warning, and an error, and each one of those has 2 different things in it. So I have little lists here, and then I have my colors variable, which is just taking each one of those. So unlike having the nested list like I built last time, I've just set this up a little bit differently just to show you another way that you could do the exact same thing. It's pretty much a nested list because success is this. So it's, just a different way to write it out. So here, what I've done is, so we're running an each loop once again. So we're saying that for an error class, each name and color inside of colors. And then, so the name is getting brought, we're using interpolation and getting that to pump out right there. They're all getting display block, a background of their color, a border, and we're using the darken here to darken the color by 20%. So the border is always a little bit darker than the color itself. And then we're putting a little bit of padding on it. And the nice thing with this is it's using the BEM naming convention, so we're using our ampersand. So what it's doing is it's grabbing error, so this is becoming error, and then it's adding the name to it, and it's creating the 3 classes that way, which is super cool. So let's say that I wanted my success and warning versions to have dark text and my error one to have light text. Well, we can start off with the if statement. So we'll come all the way down to here, and I'll add a new line. I'll say at if, and so what do we want? We're going to do if the name is equal to error, the color should be RGBA white 0.8, and that way, we'll do it with 0.8. That way, let's save that, and so it's giving me the RGBA of white 0.8. So it's going to be, it's on this dark background, so the background color will show through a little bit. So that's great, except it hasn't changed the text color of these two. I'm only able to control this one here. So that's where we can come in and then say the at else. Say that the color on this one should be RGBA black 0.8. Save that one. And now it's giving those two the other RGB value. So that's really cool that we can set that up nice and easily. We can use the if directive to make some really powerful mix-ins. Let's say we want a design that features a lot of borders. It can be a pain to always be playing around with the border properties, and a mix-in is a great way to deal with this. So, we could create something like this. Mix-in border, color width, style, border is my color width style, and then see if this is working. At include border red 5 pixels. So, let's go with dotted for something that we wouldn't normally use. Dotted. And there we go. It is working just like we want it to. So that's nice and handy. But this is targeting all the borders. What if I only wanted to control the border bottom or the border right? Well, we could create a mix-in like the one above, but for each border side. But then we need 5 mix-ins, one for controlling each side of the border and one for all the sides. that's sort of defeating the purpose of using Sass to make our lives easier. Well, if can come to the rescue on this. Let's start by modifying this. So I'm actually going to come in here and we're going to come in, we're going to delete this right here, and we'll leave that there for a second. What we're going to also add is sides. So we're going to be able to say what sides. And so we can say now that if, and we can come on this and say, so if sides is equal to all, and you'll see what I'm going to do with this in a second. My border will be my color width style, just like we had before. So now what I can do is come on here and say all. So include border, all red 5 pixels dotted, and hit save, and well, nothing changes. And to show you it is compiling, I'll change my color over to blue, and it switched that over to blue right there. So this is working, but of course this is only going to work if I have all. If I say left here, it's going to give me, and this is not going to compile because sides is not equal to all, so it just doesn't compile. So then what we can do is say else, and we can have something else happen. So if we specify a side, we want to put the side that we specified. So we can do that with some interpolation. And for something that seems so strange when we first introduce it, we sure are using interpolation a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that else, and then we'll say border sides, like that. And then we can, I'm just going to copy and paste this because this stays exactly the same. So then we can have the border sides, color, width, and style. So that now, if I save this, it's setting my border left to blue 5 pixels and dotted. So that's really cool. And now if I change this to bottom, it will switch to border bottom, blue 5 pixels and dotted just like that. Let's wrap all of this up by putting in some optional arguments to make our code even more usable. So one really useful one would be to come here and do sides all. Now if I save that, it's going to give me an error because this is setting it as an optional argument, and optional arguments always have to come at the end. So just to show you, this could be like sort of a really basic thing you could do. So sides all. Then if we don't include a side, it's still going to come and work. So that's really, really handy that we can do that. But we can make this even better. So I'm going to bring that back to the front because I think it makes more sense having the sides there. And I think on most sites you'd have some defaults on all of this because you're probably setting things to be the same most of the time. Right? So, you know, we could have something like that, and let's make this look a little prettier just by putting each one on its own line. There we go. So we could have something like that. So now we have all of that set up. So if I hit, I can just come in and say add include. Let's actually do a few different boxes here. Let's do a box 1, and let's just do an add include border. And we don't actually have to include any arguments on that. Add include border, save, and look at that. It comes and outputs something just like that. And then if I needed to, we could do a box 2. And on this, let's do an r include, and we're going to include border, and we're going to say that the color is red. And I don't actually have to set anything else on it. I can just set the red so that one box gets a different color on it. Box 3 could have include, and on this one, let's do a border with the style being dashed, because why not? And we'll do one last one, box 4. And for, you know, you might want to do an at include border, but only have it set to a side. And the nice thing with this is because it's the first argument, the side is the first one, I don't even have to specify. I can just write bottom, and it's going to come in as a border bottom, or left or right or top or whatever I need. So if you need a border bottom, a lot of the places you can just do something like that and it works right away. And of course, if I wanted like that and red, because they're in the right order, I could write it in and just put them without having to include the actual name of the variable. or the argument in there. So that can be really nice and handy and cool. I think that makes it a pretty nice little mix-in that you can use. Sometimes things aren't as black and white as simple if-else statements. You know, what if we need more than one else? Well, we can do else if. That's what it's for. So let's look at it with this simple mix-in. So here I'm saying I have a font size, and I have my TT, which is text transform. So I'm setting a font size to font size. And if the text transform is set to uppercase, I want my line height to be 1. And if it's not set to uppercase, if it's set to anything else, the line height should be 1.5. And I'm doing this because in general, if you have uppercase text, we want the line height to be a lot tighter than normal. And this is doubly true with larger font sizes. It just makes it, if not, the spacing starts to look like double spaced. It doesn't look very nice. So this works by always ensuring that our uppercase text will have a smaller line height and the rest of our text will be more normal. But if my text transform is set to none, I don't really want it to print out CSS. It's a little bit useless. So let's just take a look. Let's use this. So I'm going to say body include font size. And let's say my font size is going to be 18 pixels. And I'll just save that like that. So you can see it's done. Font size is 18, text transform is none, and line height is 1.5. And let's just put it in an uppercase here. And you can see this is changed to uppercase, and my line height is switched over to 1. So it's working the way I want it to. But if I don't have that in, I don't really want this to get printed out. It's a waste of CSS. It doesn't really need to be there. So what I can say is else if. So what this does is it lets me set another if statement pretty much. So if my text transform is set to none, then all I want to do is set my line height to 1.5. And if I have something else, so if there's a text transform that's set to, I don't know, capitalize or something else weird like that, then I can actually come in and say else text transform is my TT, and my line height is still 1.5. So I'll save that. So you can see right away by saving that it's gone away. So if my text transform is set to none, my line height will be the only thing that comes out. It's not going to bother putting out a text transform because it's kind of redundant and useless. But if I do need to have a text transform, so say I do capitalize, save that, now it will include it, but it's going to keep my line height there. And once again, if I switch this over to uppercase and I save that, now it has uppercase and it's switched over to 1. So basically what this is doing is it's saying if this is false, look for this. If this is false, then do this. If any of these compute to true, then it just stops. So if this is true, do this one. It's not even going to look at this code. No, that's not true. Let's look at this one. Nope, that's not true. Let's look at this one. And then it will print this one if nothing else along the way was true, because there's no conditions for this one. The only condition for this to print is if everything else was false. We have an alternative to the if directive, and that's the if function. The if function is a lot simpler. It's pretty much just a simplified if-else statement. The way you write it out, because it's a function, is like this. So I can then come into here, and the way it works is you write the condition that you want. So this is my condition. If it's true, do this, and if it's false, do this that I'm going to put here. So it's going to check if the condition is true. If the condition is true, it does this. If it's false, it's going to do whatever I write here. They can't be used the same way as an if directive. They return a single value, so they get placed where you'd normally have a value. So what I mean by that is, say I come in, I put a width here of 1000 pixels on my body, background, and I'm putting this where a value would go. I'm not writing in here like body. Here I normally do like at if, like that. I can't do that. I can't write if here. It's not going to work because it only outputs a value. So background, if my width is less than 1000, red, blue. So remember what I just said before. If my width is less than 1000, do this. If it's not less than 1,000, do this. So what should happen? Think about it for a second, and I'm going to hit save, and I hope you said that it would output blue. So if the width is less than 1,000, output red. If the width is more than 1,000 or equal to, output blue. So if I made this 500 pixels, now it's working. It's coming out to red because width is less than 1,000.